Eh bien, bonjour. We're going to learn today about reciprocal reflexive verbs. The word reciprocate in English implies that if somebody does something nice for you, you reciprocate by doing something nice for them. You do, in effect, what they did to you back at them. And a reciprocal reflexive verb is a verb that implies each other or one another in French. It can also mean to one another, for one another, at one another. These verbs, by their very nature, will always be used in the plural forms. So we do things for one another, they do things for one another, you and I do things for one another, you guys do things for each other. It's always plural. So they're always going to appear in French in the vous form, the nous form, and in the il, elle plural form. Here we have this wonderful picture of these two beautiful penguins, and the penguin in French is called a manchot. So we'll start with the present tense, and we're using the verb aimer, to love. Le papa manchot aime le maman manchot. Le maman manchot aime le papa manchot. So if Daddy Penguin loves Mummy Penguin, and Mummy Penguin loves Daddy Penguin, we could shorten that and simply say they love one another. And we do that by using the reflexive verb plurally. Ils s'aiment. The reflexive pronoun attaches to the front of the verb, and the verb conjugates obviously for the subject il, which is plural. Similarly, on this slide, we're using the verb aider, to help. Vous m'aidez. Je vous aide. If both of us are helping one another, then nous nous aidons. We're doubling up on the nous. The first one is the subject, we. The verb is conjugated for that subject, ons, aidons. And the second of the nous is the reflexive pronoun saying one another. Here we're using the verb donner. And now we don't give one another, we give something to one another. So in this instance, the reflexive is implying to one another. Paul donne un cadeau à Marie. Marie donne un cadeau à Paul. Ils se donnent des cadeaux. This would be translated into English then as they give one another presents, or they give presents to one another. There's no extra word for the to. The se in this case means not just one another, but to one another. Using parler, and again, we don't talk each other, we talk to each other. So, je te parle, tu me parles, becomes nous parlons. We talk to one another. That second nous has the tu already included in it. Using écrire, to write. Tu écris une lettre à ton ami. Ton ami écrit une lettre à toi. Alors, vous vous écrivez des lettres. You write letters to one another. This next set of slides is showing how we use the reciprocal reflexive verbs in the past tense using passé composé. As you know, when we use passé composé, especially when we have verbs that take être, we have to add agreements to the end of the past participle. The past participle, in effect, becomes more like an adjective in French, which adds an e for feminine and an s for plural. So when we use reciprocal reflexive verbs, they are automatically going to be taking être because all reciprocal verbs, all reflexive verbs, are conjugated with être in the passé composé, and therefore need agreements. But there's a couple of times when we don't put an agreement on, and I'm going to show you the difference. In this first instance, we have two young ladies sitting, having a drink together, and obviously it must have happened in the past, so we'll assume it was yesterday. J'ai vu ma sœur. I saw my sister. Ma sœur m'a vu. The E on the end of that word vu is there because the direct object with which it is agreeing is that little reflexive pronoun me. My sister saw me. I'm female, therefore it's agreeing right there. When we put those two together into we saw one another, we've got nous nous sommes vus, The first nous is the subject. The second nous is the direct object. We saw one another. And therefore, we are going to have to add an E and an S, now that it is feminine and plural, to the end of that past participle. Here's another example. We have two naughty little boys here. Le garçon blond a battu le garçon roux. Puis, le garçon roux a battu le garçon blond. Alors, ils se sont battus. The blonde boy hit the redhead boy. Then the red-haired boy hit the blonde boy. So, hence, they hit each other. They hit one another. That S is there because they are masculine and plural. Our next example is just a little different. Let's take a look. Magali a raconté ses secrets à Patricia. Patricia a raconté ses secrets à Magali. Magali et Patricia se sont racontés des secrets. You will notice here that in the final sentence, Magali and Patricia told secrets to one another. They told one another secrets. The secrets appears in the sentence after the past participle raconter. Therefore, there is no agreement on raconter, because remember, we agree with direct objects that precede, that come before the past participle in the sentence. So in this sentence, the secrets is the direct object, that's what's told, and the reflexive pronoun, the se, is now the indirect object. They told those secrets, after all, to one another. That is indirect. We have a to in there. And now we have two giraffes looking at one another. Une girafe a regardé une autre girafe. L'autre girafe l'a regardé aussi. The L apostrophe in that second sentence refers to the first giraffe and is feminine. Therefore, there is an agreement on regarder. Now we put the two together. The two giraffes looked at one another. Les deux girafes se sont regardées. The se here is the direct object. Regarder, therefore, has feminine and plural agreements. We do have to remember that there are a couple of verbs in French, regarder being one of them, that take a direct object. Instead of thinking of it as being to look at, think of it as being to watch. And then it becomes more obvious that it is a direct object and not indirect. And here in our last slide of all, we have il lui a donné une alliance. He gave her a ring. Elle lui a donné une alliance. She gave him a ring. Or we could also say he gave a ring to her and she gave a ring to him. When it's put together, ils se sont donné des alliances. The se here is indirect because those rings are what was actually given. They are the direct object and they appear in the sentence after the past participle. Therefore, no agreement on donner. The se is indirect because the alliance is direct. Now that you have watched the PowerPoint, please complete the worksheet that was handed to you in class and submit it tomorrow as your homework. Thank you et au revoir.